I was just a simple woman, mourning my husband of 50 years when my daughter-in-law humiliated me at his funeral. She thought I'd stay silent, but my husband had left behind a secret one that changed everything. What followed wasn't just justice. It was the truth finally being heard. My truth. The church was filled with lilies and roses, Robert's favorites. Their fragrance clung to the air, but all Elena JM could smell was grief. Her hands trembled as she sat in the front pew, staring at the casket that held her husband of 50 years. Robert had been her rock, her partner, her best friend. Now he was gone. "Are you okay, Mom?" her daughter Maya whispered, squeezing her hand. Elena nodded, unable to speak. The void left behind by Robert's passing was too large for words. People she barely remembered offered hollow condolences. Her son Darren entered with his wife, Simone, tall, poised, and wearing a black dress that looked like it belonged in a boardroom, not a funeral. They hadn't visited Robert once in his final weeks. Always too busy. Always excuses. Elena rose when it was her turn to speak. Her voice shook as she remembered the porch evenings, the slow dances in the kitchen, the arguments that always ended in laughter. But she was interrupted by Simone's cold, sharp whisper, loud enough for the row behind them to hear. "Look at those crocodile tears. She shouldn't be crying. Everyone knows they were basically separated." Gasps echoed around the room. Elena froze, unable to process the betrayal. But Darren said nothing. He looked away, ashamed of her, not his wife. The words pierced deeper than any grief. 50 years of love, loyalty, and sacrifice reduced to gossip and venom at her husband's funeral, and her own son remained silent. Elena JM sat in the front pew of the church, her black lace gloves trembling as she clutched a folded tissue. Her husband of 50 years, Harold JM, lay peacefully in the casket before her, roses and lilies surrounding him, the scent sweet yet unbearable. The stained glass windows cast soft-colored light onto the polished wooden floors, but to Elena, everything felt gray. Beside her sat her daughter, Camille, her eyes swollen from crying. Elena's son, Darius, entered late, guided by his wife, Nadine. Elena's stomach turned. Nadine had always been polite but cold, and in recent years, she had grown bolder, louder, and dangerously manipulative. The service began. Camille gave a tearful tribute, her voice cracking as she recalled Harold teaching her to dance barefoot in the kitchen. When it was Elena's turn, she approached the podium slowly, eyes brimming with tears. Her voice faltered, but she found her strength. "Harold was my home," she said softly. "Through every joy and storm, we stood together, until now." As she returned to her seat, Nadine leaned over to the woman beside her and whispered, just loud enough to be heard, "Look at her. Crocodile tears." They were barely together near the end. The words sliced through Elena like a blade. Camille gasped in outrage, but Elena said nothing. She didn't need to, not yet, because Harold had planned for this moment, and soon everything would change. The sun had barely shifted in the sky when the mourners arrived at the JM family estate, an old, dignified manor in Atlanta, filled with polished oak, family portraits, and years of silence. Elena sat in the parlor beside Camille, her gloved hands folded neatly in her lap. Her heart was still heavy from the funeral, but something else hummed beneath her ribs' anticipation. Darius and Nadine entered like they owned the place. Nadine scanned the room with calculating eyes, her voice sweet as syrup. "Let's get this over with," she said with a sigh. "Some of us have meetings tomorrow." Camille's jaw clenched, but she stayed quiet. Mr. Langston, the family attorney, entered moments later carrying a leather briefcase and an envelope marked "Private." As per Mr. Harold JM's final instructions, he began, "This will reading will commence immediately." He looked directly at Elena. "There is a letter that must be read first." He handed it to her. Elena's breath caught as she recognized her husband's handwriting, steady, careful. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. "My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But please remember, I saw it all. I saw the distance grow. I saw who stayed, and I saw who circled, waiting for me to fall. I couldn't say it aloud, but I made sure the truth would speak for itself. Whatever comes next, remember you deserve peace, not shame. And you're not alone. Elena lowered the letter. The room had gone silent. Even Nadine shifted in her seat. Mr. Langston nodded solemnly and opened the will. Mr. Langston cleared his throat, then began. To my wife, Elena Monroe JM, I leave the JM family estate, including all its contents, investments, and liquid assets, in full. A gasp rippled through the room. Nadine's head whipped toward Darius, who looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. To my daughter, Camille Monroe JM, I leave a trust fund in her name, and the library collection her grandfather passed down because she always saw its value. Camille blinked, stunned. Her mouth opened slightly, but she didn't speak. Elena reached over and gently squeezed her hand. To my son, Darius JM. Langston hesitated for a breath. I leave the business office on Glenview Street and the Cadillac Escalade. Nadine scoffed. The Glenview office? That's barely worth. And to Nadine Adams JM, Langston continued, ignoring her, I leave a framed family photograph, because sometimes a picture is the only truth one will ever see. There was a stunned silence. You're joking, Nadine muttered. Is this a joke? A picture? Langston slid the small framed photo across the table. Mr. JM requested it be presented directly. Nadine stared down at it. In the photo, Harold stood between Elena and Camille, their faces soft with real joy. Nadine and Darius were blurred in the background, their expressions unreadable. You can't be serious, she hissed, her voice rising. After all we did for him. Did for him? Elena finally spoke, her voice calm and razor sharp. You didn't even visit him in the hospital. Darius stood abruptly. This is some kind of setup. Langston folded the will and placed it neatly back in the folder. Mr. JM made his wishes clear. The estate is no longer in dispute. This concludes the reading. After the others had stormed out, Nadine mumbling threats, and Darius refusing to look Elena in the eye, only Elena, Camille, and Mr. Langston remained. Langston reached into his briefcase and produced a smaller envelope, this one sealed with a crimson wax stamp. Your husband left this to be opened only in your presence, Miss Elena. His words. He said you'd know when the time was right. Elena hesitated. Her fingers trembled slightly as she broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter and a USB drive. She unfolded the letter, instantly recognizing Harold's neat script. My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, then they've all revealed themselves just as I feared they would. This family has worn masks for too long, but you've always stood in your truth. Tears welled in her eyes as she continued reading. This USB contains a recording one I made during the final week of my life. I couldn't speak my heart in front of them, but I want the world to hear it in my voice. When you're ready, let Camille play it. For the family, for the world, if needed. At the bottom, he had written, Tell Camille, thank you for helping me see again. And Elena, my love, thank you for staying. Elena pressed the letter to her chest. Camille leaned closer. Do you want to watch it now? She whispered. Elena wiped her eyes and shook her head. Not here, at home. She turned to Langston, voice steady. Thank you. My husband was wise, and so very brave. Later that evening, Elena sat at her dining table, the letter still in her hands. Camille had come home with her, silent during the drive, but steady, like a lighthouse through fog. Liam sat on the couch, fidgeting with his shoelaces, sensing the tension, but unsure how to ask. Elena looked over at her son, then to Camille, and finally back at the small black USB drive. Let's do it, she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was anchored. Camille connected the drive to her laptop. The screen lit up. A folder appeared with a single file. For Elena, play when they forget who you are. She clicked. The screen faded into an image of Harold. He was seated in his study, wearing his favorite brown cardigan and glasses. His voice was hoarse, but clear. If you're hearing this, I'm gone, but you're still here. Elena, they didn't see you, but I did. Every day. Elena gripped the table's edge. To my son Darius, I saw the hunger in your ambition, but I also saw how you let that ambition bury your heart. To Nadine, I knew you married into this family for status, and I accepted it, thinking love might grow, but love cannot grow where contempt lives. He paused, taking a long breath. As for my wife, Elena, you gave me everything. Peace when there was none, truth when I didn't want to hear it, strength when I was too weak to stand. Camille reached for Elena's hand under the table. You once asked why I stayed with a family that treated you like less. The answer was simple. I stayed because you made it a home. The screen went dark for a moment. Then Harold's voice returned, softer now. The house, the foundation, the memories, I leave them to you and Liam. Because this family was never about blood, it was about who showed up. Elena's breath caught. Her hand went to her mouth. Liam looked at her, wide-eyed. I'm so proud of you, Elena, Harold said, his face soft now. I just wish I'd said it louder so no one would ever doubt it again. And with that, the video ended. Silence wrapped around them like a thick blanket. Elena stared at the screen, heart wide open, pain and pride tangled together. Then Liam whispered, He heard you, Mom. Elena exhaled, finally letting the tears fall, not from sorrow, but release. The next day, the air inside the lawyer's office was stiff with anticipation. Elena sat beside Camille and Liam, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Across from them sat Darius and Nadine, dressed in black but exuding nothing but contempt. Darius drummed his fingers on the table. Nadine glanced at her watch, clearly impatient. Mr. Thomas, Harold's longtime attorney, entered the room, carrying a leather folder and a small envelope. He looked around, nodding with professional solemnity. As per Mr. Harold Montgomery's final instructions, we'll begin with the formal reading of the will. He cleared his throat and opened the folder. To my son, Darius Montgomery, I leave the Blue Jaguar in the carriage house, and my collection of vintage jazz records. Darius sat back, blinking. That's it? He muttered. Nadine shot him a sharp look but said nothing. Mr. Thomas continued. To my daughter-in-law, Nadine Montgomery, I leave a token gift of $1 on the record, and with respect, to avoid legal confusion. Nadine's jaw dropped. She leaned forward. You've got to be kidding me. But Mr. Thomas ignored the interruption. To my grandson, Liam Jeremiah Montgomery, I leave the Montgomery family estate located on Willow Hill, and full rights to the Harold J. Montgomery Community Foundation. Gasps filled the room. As trustee and legal guardian until Liam's 18th birthday, I name Elena Jean-Marie Montgomery. All eyes shot toward Elena. She didn't speak. She couldn't. Her heart thundered so loudly it drowned out everything else. And to my wife, Elena, Mr. Thomas added, I leave all remaining assets, bank accounts, investments, personal belongings, and the deed to the family home, to be held in her name without contest. Darius slammed his hand on the table. This is a setup. She manipulated him. Elena finally spoke, her voice calm but strong. He saw who was there when it mattered. That was enough. Mr. Thomas handed over the envelope Harold had labeled, Only if they forget who she is. He wanted me to give this to you, he said to Elena. Inside was a photograph of Harold and Elena standing in front of the house, arm in arm, beaming. On the back, scribbled in Harold's familiar handwriting, You were the light. Let them see what I saw. Camille smiled through her tears. Liam leaned into Elena's side, proud, knowing. The reading was over, but the storm had only just begun. Outside the law office, Nadine stormed down the steps, heels clicking like gunshots against the marble. Darius followed close behind, his voice low and furious. This isn't over, Nadine. She played him. She tricked him when he was sick. But Nadine wasn't listening. She was already pulling out her phone. We'll sue. We'll go to the press. Who's going to believe a woman who was barely even his wife? Inside, Elena stood still in the lobby, Liam's hand tucked in hers. The sunlight through the tall glass windows painted soft patterns on her skin. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't broken either. Camille rested a hand on her shoulder. You okay? Elena nodded, exhaling slowly. I think for the first time in years, I actually am. They walked slowly to the car, a quiet trio, as if each step peeled away the years of erasure and disrespect. Later that evening, as dusk fell, Elena sat on the porch of the house she now legally owned. The breeze carried traces of honeysuckle and the old memories. Liam sat cross-legged nearby, flipping through a photo album. He held up one picture, a younger Harold laughing, mid-dance. Was he always that happy? Elena smiled faintly. No. But when he was, it was because he let himself see past pride. She took the album from Liam's hands and closed it gently. People can try to take a lot of things from you. Money, credit, even your name. But they can't take who you are. Liam leaned into her side. They tried, though. Elena looked down at her son, and they failed. It was a quiet Sunday morning, the kind where time seemed to move slower, letting peace settle gently into the corners of the house. Elena had just finished making tea when Camille stepped into the room, holding a small envelope. This was in the lawyer's folder. He said Harold left it for you, privately. The handwriting was unmistakable, thick, precise strokes, as familiar as Harold's voice. Elena sat down at the kitchen table, steam curling from her teacup, and opened it with careful fingers. Inside was a single handwritten note. If they hurt you again, if they try to erase you again, show them this. And if not, just read it and remember, I always saw you. Her hand trembled as she pulled out a second sheet. This one wasn't for court. It wasn't legal. It was Harold raw, unfiltered. Elena, if you're reading this, I didn't get to say it in person. Maybe I was too proud, maybe too ashamed. But I never stopped loving you. I was scared of growing old, of not being the man I used to be. You stayed, even when I was hard to love. You taught me grace. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she read on. Nadine always wanted a piece of what I built. But you built me. And that's why I changed everything. Not out of revenge, but because you deserved to be seen. And I needed you to know I was proud to call you my wife. Tell Liam I'm proud of him too. He's better than all of us. She folded the letter back slowly, pressing it to her chest. Outside, Liam chased bubbles on the front lawn. Camille stood quietly in the doorway, watching Elena with wide, glassy eyes. What did he say? She asked softly. Elena smiled through her tears, enough to undo all the silence. That afternoon, Camille scrolled through her phone with trembling hands. Her lips thinned, her brows furrowed. Mom, you need to see this. Elena took the phone. The screen showed a Facebook post by Nadine, already gathering comments and reactions. The caption read, "When your loyal stepmother manipulates a dying man into changing his will, family means nothing these days." Below were photos from the funeral, cropped and darkened, designed to spark rage. One showed Elena crying, captioned, "Crocodile tears." Another showed Liam beside her, teaching the next generation to steal. The comments stung worse than anything Nadine could have said in person. She was never real family anyway. How disgusting, using grief to profit. Someone should sue. Camille's voice trembled. She's trying to ruin you. Elena stood still, the weight of decades pressing against her spine. Let her. No, Mom. You can't keep letting them tell the story. That night, after tucking Liam in, Elena sat at her old writing desk. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard of her laptop. Then she began to type. My name is Elena JM. I was married to Harold Morris for 31 years. At his funeral, my stepdaughter called my tears fake, said I manipulated a man she hadn't visited in months. So let me tell you the truth. She poured her soul into the post, the sacrifices, the late-night hospital visits, the silence, the truth behind the trust, and Harold's final words. It was not angry. It was not vengeful. It was steady, clear, and full of grace. She ended it with one line. Grief is not a performance, and love does not expire when others disapprove. She hit post and went to bed,